welcome back to my podcast Center Sessions. So, sorry, it's been I think it's been a 2 week gap since my last upload, and I was down in Sydney, which is why I haven't been uploading a lot. But I'm back now, and so essentially, what today is going to be is pretty much a. It's not going to be a long podcast today. I want to ease myself back into it. But what today is going to be is basically a rundown of what happened on my trip and how it relates to what I'm going to talk about today, specifically regarding POCs in Sydney. Um, the reason I decided to make this episode today was because while I was down in Sydney, I was with my cousin who is also Sri Lankan. He is 19, and so only a 2 year age gap, but it was very interesting to see the differences between the two of us, with regards to how we view life and how we go about life, right? And not only that, it was very interesting to see the type of people that he surrounded himself with that were POCs, in the sense that a lot of the brown people that he surrounded himself with, I had not been used to seeing in Brisbane with my POC friends. Um, and so this was something that I was very surprised by. It was good to see. Um, and it has helped me partially dispel a few of my own preconceived conceptions of being brown in this country, and has also reinforced a few stereotypes for myself. So overall, very, very interesting experience. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So I'll start off essentially by, just giving a general recap of the trip in itself. I need to add content, so that's why. Um, so I went down for 2 weeks, and I mostly went. I traveled by myself, and I lived with my cousin's family. But for a lot of the trip, I was by myself, going through Sydney, just day to day. Just doing my thing, going to the Opera House, going to um the like the Harbour Bridge, and I will show you a few pictures now if I can. Give me 1 second, guys, of just some of the things that I went to see today. So okay, cool. This is my Instagram. So this is just a few photos of me at the Opera House here, and I edited the photos to sort of make it seem like clones, and you can tell how shoddy the editing is just by swinging on that part there. And so these were a couple of photos that I took by myself. I had to set up a tripod and do this by myself. The photos are heavily edited, as you can tell, just to bring up the color and all that. And so this was me in the Harbour Bridge. Um, I didn't really. These are photos in general of me just out and about. Um, this was outside a club called Fiddlers, which was really nice. And this is my cousin. This is my younger cousin, me. And these are all just places that I went to while I was there. So nothing super, crazy on like in that sense. Um, but let me just fix this up really quickly. Um, Completely forgot how to use Twitch in like 2 weeks that I have been here. Okay, there we go. All right, so yeah, that's basically a short rundown. I did go to a lot of Sri Lankan places. So I did go to a Buddhist temple. I also went to a Sri Lankan mart. So they're called game kadis, essentially. That's the rough translation. It means Sri Lankan shop for the most part. I'm pretty sure it means something. But there I went, and I was able to try out a lot of things that I connected with when I was younger, like these beverages called cream sodas and ginger beer. These are all specifically made by a company called Elephant House, and they are distributed within Sri Lanka. So it's not something that you can find in the local Coles or Kmart here. I mean, sorry, Coles or Woolies here. So you have to go to these curated places to buy them. It would be I guess a similar notion would be, specific brown sugar iced tea drinks that you can only buy at Korea Mart or like Hanara Mart and stuff like that. You can't really buy them in the general supermarkets. You have to go to a specific place. That type of same type of deal. Um, I went to these places and I was able to sort of try fish rolls and fish buns and these things called crocodile buns, which are sort of it's a bun that's shaped like a crocodile with sugar all over it. It's a really nice thing that we used to have when we were younger in Sri Lanka. So it was very nice for me to be able to connect back with the things that I enjoyed about my culture and specifically the food. And so I took the opportunity while I was down there to see the type of people that converged at these places. And it was 100% like a good experience for me, very very interesting to go to. And I was able to reconnect with a bit of myself in terms of the food aspect, which was nice. um One thing I should mention, the big part of the trip that I went to, just give me one second, guys, um, was that I went to a cricket game. It's not that great. So I went to a cricket game at the Sydney Cricket Ground. And the team specifically that were playing was Australia and Sri Lanka. So that was a big deal for me in the sense that I hadn't been to a cricket game in somewhere close to about 7 years, right? Um, and the last game I did go to was again Sri Lanka and Australia. And I remember going down to the cricket ground and being just like bubbling with excitement, right? Because for the most part, while I was with my cousin and while I was down in Sydney, I wasn't able to really, you know, like I wasn't able to see all the people that were like me. I was able to see a lot of brown people in the sense of a lot of Indian people, Pakistani people, but not many Sri Lankan people, if that makes sense. So going to the SCG and watching these cricket games and being surrounded by, like this whole environment within the stands that I was in, where you had all these people playing drums and singing the songs and or like wearing our national colors and wearing the cricket team shirt. It was a very good experience for me just to sort of take pride in where I come from, which was refreshing to me because Sri Lanka's culture is very much overshadowed, I feel, by India's culture. Where with a lot of people, for the lack of a better word, because of a lack of knowledge, a lot of people just couple in Sri Lanka as part of India when it's really its own nation, own identity. So it was nice to be in a space where you know there was no reason for anybody to confuse us with anybody, and nobody was going to do that, and we were able to sort of show who we are and put ourselves in that really good area where everybody around us was supportive. And yeah, it was just this stand full of colors and noise and smells of food, and it was just a really really enlightening experience for me just to also also just be able to like sit down and kind of talk to people. These are just complete strangers that I was talking to, but because we were all from the same place, you know connected with the same ideals, and we were still watching the same team hoping for the same result. We were able to almost seamlessly transition into being friends without having ever met, through the you know uh pure a bit availability of language, is something that I really enjoyed as well. um Aside from that, I think that was a big thing for me in terms of learning about, like, using what I learned in that experience for this podcast. um One thing I did also go to alone was a lot of art museums. I've been taking a keen interest in appreciating more in life, um, in the sense of you know looking around more and appreciating architecture and art. So I went to the White Rabbit Gallery by myself, which was really nice. Um, saw a lot of kooky things, but I took some photos and they're all on my Instagram as well, on my highlights. Um, and I also went to the Sydney Museum and the Museum of Contemporary Art. So a lot of good places that I went to where I was able to sort of see um, parts of other people's cultures as well, which is one thing that I always enjoy doing. Um, Australia has does focus a lot on Aboriginal history and on Aboriginal art, which is good. And I think more needs to be done. Um, and certain museums, like Museum of Contemporary Art, also had exhibits from international artists as well, which was good to see. Um, and I think art is one of those things where you know it can connect so many people together because it is a blank canvas. That's where it all starts from, and it's all up to a person's interpretation, and it can be justified in any way. And ultimately, we as an audience have to just accept that and try to take it for what it is. And we can't really make our own judgments prior to seeing, which is a good thing, I think. And coming in with an open mind, especially when it comes to art, means we are able to appreciate so much more of it. So that was something that I'd focused on as well. Because this podcast primarily revolves around POC issues, but mostly brown POC issues, I have been trying to, you know, network with other people, other POCs from Southeast Asia and East Asia, uh, to kind of open up the scope of what I talk about here. Because ultimately, the goal is to help people, not necessarily the goal is for more younger POCs around the age of 10 to 15, maybe 10 to 20, to understand that the way that they behave and the way they think and the way that the world perceives them is not something specific to them. It's something that we all go through, and it can be hard, but it has its positives. And sticking through it and learning to appreciate it when you get older is where the real magic happens. So that's what I've been trying to do, and that's what's a big part of Sydney was, um, to just sort of go and talk to people and ask, and truly decipher how they see the world, because the way that one person sees the world, like me, is very different to whoever else. The next person that walks through this room can see the world in a completely different way. So that was one thing. But we will get into it now. It's been about 10 minutes of me rambling, so we'll get into what I discovered slash learned while I was down there. So a big thing that I learned was that me specifically as a brown POC, I'm not as how do I explain it? I'm not as risky, if you will, as the other POCs down in Sydney are. Um, when I walked in when I landed, I noticed, I don't want to be rude, but they all kind of do look the same. All these brown boys, have like their ears pierced and have their beard lined up and faded in, and you know, gold necklace or gold chain, and they all vape. They all vape. It's insane. Um, I found that pretty funny at the start. Admittedly, I have got my ears pierced. I just got them done while I was in Sydney. I had my ears pierced a few years ago before I left for Japan, but I kind of grew out of the style. But it was very strange because the more I spent time with the brown people in Sydney, I was there for 2 weeks only. But the second week, I spent a lot of time with brown people, and I found myself wanting to be more like them, wanting to fit in a little bit more. That was something that I saw was pretty interesting. Um, so I found myself, kind of trying to find the intricacies of what it is to be brown in Sydney and kind of molding my personality a little bit to that. Obviously, I didn't have enough time to completely transform myself, and I can feel myself reverting to who I really am back here. Um, But things like I think, I had never considered even getting my ears pierced again until I came to Sydney. So I think that's something that's very interesting for me. That's something that I was like, that really did happen, which was I think is pretty interesting. You know, it's not often that that type of thing happens to me, but when I went down there, I was I found that people there's a big, because the population in Sydney is massive compared to Brisbane, and the area itself is a big place. You find POCs of all types, right? Where you have extremely whitewashed people and extremely cultural people. and you find people that have found a middle ground in between. Um, but I can't say I'm not this podcast. I'm gonna be focusing particularly on male POCs, male brown like brown guys. I didn't necessarily talk to too many brown girls while I was down there. It was um it was hard to meet them, if that makes sense. There was never really much of a environment for me to meet them because a lot of the people that I met was through clubbing, which you can only really maximize a 10-minute conversation, so you can't really get too much out of these people. And the brown boys that I met were my cousin's friends, so I had extended time with them. But essentially, I found that a lot of these brown guys they kind of merge into the same identity. Um, when you go down there and you meet them for the first time, obviously But my point is that you really need to know them and be their friends to kind of see the differences in their personalities. Me from an outsider's perspective, with only a handful of days of meeting them, I really could tell the difference with some of the brown guys that I met. Um, the way they dress, the way they behave, the stuff they talk about, it is very one dimensional and square. That is to me, but that's only a specific group of people. And there were a few brown boys that my cousin introduced me to who were close friends of his. And when I talked to those boys, I saw, these guys are very intelligent, very goal driven. Like they still know how to have fun. And um, one of them drives a Toyota 86. And, I had a very good conversation with him a few times. And I could tell that, my cousin has managed to find some like these brown boys are very goal orientated and have a lot of drive to them. And they're not, their personality is a little bit more than just the I vape, wear jewelry, and wear Nike Tech Fleece. You know what I mean? These boys are a little bit more to them. But it was very interesting to see that, in the sense that I didn't, I didn't meet a lot of nerdy brown boys. I did go to UTS, so the University of Technology Sydney, for 2 days with my cousin, just, on my last 2 days before I came back here, just to see, again, the type of people that I would have seen at my uni. And I wanted to compare particularly the way they dress, because I wasn't because of the way that uni works down in Sydney, especially with their COVID cases. It is hard to sort of stop people and kind of have a conversation or go into classes and talk to them. And because I'm not a registered student, we had to sneak in, or a lot of times we didn't even bother going because of how much of an ordeal it was. Um, I looked at the way they dressed quite a bit, and the justification for that is because in my for me, in my opinion, you can tell if a person is whitewashed, or not necessarily whitewashed, but if they're like an international student or if they're not, by the way they dress, right? And I think for me, what I did was I made a sort of mental note. Some of the signs that I was looking for were the type of shoes they're wearing, maybe the brands that they were wearing, and how they styled their pieces. And I wasn't. I will admit, I had a preconceived notion of what the international brown boy dresses like, because of what I've seen from my own university. And I can neither confirm nor deny that those type of people exist, because we weren't able to see that many, because of it being O week. That like we went during O week, and then we went again and it was raining, so we didn't really get to see too many people. Um, so I didn't get to see too many of the international brown people, or the nerdy brown people. I was able to mostly meet people like me, um, or yeah, like in the sense like people who have second generation immigrants. That's the word that I'm looking for. Um, who are either born here or moved here, and even that was a very rewarding experience, because I was able to see that in many cases these people are exactly the way I am, and they think the way I do, and they have the same ideas or perspectives on the way things work, but at the same time they also have such vast ideas to the way that I think. um, and don't want to get too specific into scenarios because I don't have consent from these people about telling you guys about them. But I found that the way that a lot of these brown boys that I met live life can be very nonchalant, but they are obviously my age, which is 20, like 19 to 20. So 19 to 24. So they are very much on the wilder side, which was again something I did expect because of the large population. It's almost impossible to really think that all brown people are going to, just be at home studying all day. Like there has to be a population of people who do sort of live a little bit, um, live life on the edge a little bit. So experiencing that firsthand, or experiencing more of it firsthand, was very eye opening for me, um, and it made me very comfortable in the sense I was able to kind of get out of my shell a little bit. And having come from a completely different state where nobody knows me, nobody knows who I am or my past, I had no reason to worry about any judgment, if that makes sense. Um, I think a lot of times people are always afraid of what somebody else will think, and they only think that way because the person they're afraid of being judged by knows them, right? So when you're in a position where nobody knows you, you kind of have nothing to lose. You're able to kind of open up your walls a little bit, and I was able to do that while I was down in Sydney, and it was very nice. Very entertaining and very rewarding in being able to kind of showcase who I am, how I think, and also being able to partake in completely different activities, um, and help people from who come from the same place that I do. Um, so that was something very interesting to me. Um, I also ended up spending quite a lot of time sort of understanding that not every POC sees the value of culture in the same way. Um, One thing that I realize that is that sometimes I might harp too much on the value and importance of culture. Sometimes these people just don't care. Like people just don't care about it. Um, and I found that very interesting. So when I went down to Sydney, I found that not everybody kind of thought about being brown or being cultural as much as I did. A lot of people saw themselves as Australian. They didn't see themselves as brown in any way. And that was kind of jarring to me because there is obviously, like you can obviously identify as Australian, but at the root of your genetics, you're not, like, you know what I mean? Like, you are from somewhere else. Um, and that was a very interesting conversation that I had with a lot of people where I had to kind of truly dissect why they felt the need to only identify as Australian as opposed to kind of, you know, maybe like acknowledging, that's the right word, acknowledging the fact that they also are in some way, you know, a POC essentially. Um, um, so that was very interesting. What I will do right now, guys, is I'll put on Asphalt 7 or Asphalt 9 so you guys can watch me do something. So it's not like I'm just staring at my screen the whole time. Um, okay, cool. Um, so yeah, I found myself very surprised, and yeah, I spent a lot of time trying to sort of understand why they choose to not acknowledge culture as part of themselves. And I've learned that a lot of people have been exposed to the negative aspects of brown culture. And that's not to say that I haven't, but it's more that they've kind of been exposed to it and have used that to completely disown or dis disband the ideal from their identity. Um, so a specific conversation I remember I had was what a person that I had met explained to me that when she was younger, a lot of times conversations with her aunties back home in India or relatives or family friends would revolve a lot around shaming. So she'd be shamed for doing sort of things that she really just enjoyed as a child that didn't involve studying, you know. And she, for a lot of the time, she felt that she was being fat shamed, and she had a lot of conversations where family friends would keep asking her to lose weight or if she's going to. And so when I learned about this, when I had these conversations, I realized that you can understand why some people just well and truly would rather move away from identifying with being brown because of the negative experiences that they felt or been through. Um, so that's one of the things that the more I've listened to it, the more I can understand that our culture is extremely toxic in many ways. So sometimes you can't hold it against people when they do want to kind of find a different avenue of self acceptance. I think Australian culture predominantly revolves around this ideal of that everyone and anyone and everyone is Australian, and we accept you for who you are, and and that's great. So uh, um, because of that, we have a lot of people kind of transition away from being wholeheartedly brown, right? And because brown culture can be extremely restrictive and extremely prejudiced and judgmental against the smallest of retaliation or self exploration, whatever. Because of that, and because a lot of time Australian culture has done a great job in advertising individuality and expressing the idea that you can be whatever you want and still be considered one of us. Like that's what the whole fundamental base of Australian culturalism is. That your food does not have to look like mine, your dances don't have to look like mine, your language does not have to be mine. But we are still united under the same flag. Like that is something that I noticed and felt when I arrived to this country. This I don't want to use the word harping because that does come off as disrespectful and ungrateful. So the constant advocacy for multiculturalism and explaining that no matter who you are and where you're from and what you look like, you still fall under the same banner of Australian is something that I think is very good. It's a very important ideal to stress to people, which brown culture doesn't have. Brown culture extremely is at times, very individualistic. Right, that's the word I'm looking for. Where everybody wants to identify with a specific thing, and the second you branch away from that, you are branded as some sort of renegade or rebellious person, and then end up being judged and kind of looked down upon for your behavior when really that's you. That's just something that you like to do. There's nothing wrong with that. Um, while I was down there, I realized that a lot of these people, a lot of these brown kids, have been felt have been exposed to that ideal, where the things they want to do and the person they want to be is not accepted by brown culture because it sits outside the norm. So they transfer their identity, their goals, their ideals. They move towards the Australian banner of acceptance, and that is the outlet for them to then say that, okay, well, you don't accept me. I don't. That's fine. I'm not going to try to change you, but I'm going to identify with this group of people who are more willing to accept the person that I am or will be. And I think that's what is so good about being, you know, a little bit whitewashed as a POC. Um, and I mean, there's not really much wrong with it, to be honest with you. And I think it's a great thing that a lot of countries, specifically in the US and UK and Australia, a lot of whitewashed countries, especially Australia, Australia has culture obviously of its own, but it's still very, you know, Australia has been defined by its multiculturalism, whereas countries like the US and UK kind of had their own identity prior to immigration, and it's been fortified through that, right? Um, so that's how I feel as to why a lot of POCs become whitewashed and stuff like that. Um, Obviously, that being said, it's not the same with everybody. Some POCs have been ostracized and you know made to feel as though they aren't good enough within Australian culture. Um, and I think that's something that's been overshadowed a little bit by people. Um, but we can't focus on the negatives all the time. Um, but yeah, while I was down there having these conversations with people who do identify themselves as Australian and not Indian or Sri Lankan or Bangladeshi or whatever, um, when I first had those conversations, I was so almost in shock. I was like, how could you do that? You can't change your skin color. Like, you should be more open to accepting it. Blah blah blah. Like, I did find myself to be quite I don't not rude isn't the right word, but a little bit more skeptical and questioning of their decisions. Um, I will admit that that was the way I thought when I first had these conversations. But the more I had the conversations, the more I sort of kept up in mind and realized that some people have just been, you know, brought up in a position where they haven't been able to see the best of the culture. I changed the way I viewed their answers, and I also changed the way I responded to them, in the sense that I've been a strong advocate of reconnection with your culture. I think that's one thing that people aren't given the chance to, but also aren't willing to put the effort into. And I think reconnection with culture is a very general statement, and I shouldn't be blanketing it like that. What I mean is reconnection through your own ways. So that doesn't mean go to a temple and it's all solved or whatever, anything like that. I mean more so you find a group of people and you pick an aspect of the culture that you think you would enjoy and focus on learning as much as you can about that and trying to decipher how you want to contribute to that. Um, that's how I would. That's how I would recommend it be done. Um, so for me, you know, one of the ways that I would have done it, actually, one of the ways I did do it when I was younger was to um, kind of reconnect through food. So for me, food was a big thing. I was a very chunky boy when I was younger, and so when I was growing up, obviously there came a point where I sort of didn't want to, identify as the guy who ate chicken rice every day at school. That wasn't something that I was happy with. Wasn't the look that I was going for, and so I started, having a lot more quote unquote white food, right? A lot more sandwiches and burgers and all that stuff. Um, but the way that I managed to sort of reconnect with my culture was to a few years down the line learn how to cook. And so once I learned how to cook, I focused primarily on making cultural food, right? So rice and curry and biryani and stuff like that. Food that I had grown up with, I focused on making for myself and making for people that I loved, um, as a sort of self-help therapy kind of thing. And what I found is that it helped me sort of rekindle my joy for food, right? My joy for culture food, but it also helped me understand the intricacy of the food that I was eating. So it no longer was just something that you know I was just having. Like this was something that I grew up with. This was, and I understood why it was made the way it was, and it had helped me appreciate so much more of the effort that goes into the food and the significance of everything. I was able to understand why each spice goes into this specific place and time and how it all brings the food together. So that's how I reconnected with my culture. But that's not the only way. You can reconnect through music, through dance, through movies, through like events. Um, and so for me, in my opinion, I think that there aren't not enough POCs want to reconnect with their culture because they haven't found the way to do so. They haven't found that outlet. You know. Oh. Oh my god! Got a new follower. That's so nice. Why does it keep cutting out? I have my AirPods in. Maybe. Maybe. Um. I'll speak a little louder. But a lot of yeah. My point was that a lot of POCs haven't found the way back in their culture, right? And because the only way that most POCs know or have experience with their culture is through their parents, they have a very skewed and very specific way that they see it. Um, that's just that's how I that's what I believe. Um, and so the way that I kind of propositioned a few of the people that I met in Sydney was to you know go to more street markets. Especially there's a neighborhood called Chatswood in Sydney, which has been said to be a primarily Asian suburb, similar to Sunnybank in Brisbane. So when I went to Chatswood my last week, and there was a massive street market down the down the avenue or boardwalk, if you will, and all these street vendors from different cultures, like there was from China, Japan, Korea, Turkey, Armenia, all these like countries or representatives, if you will, had brought in their food, and I took every opportunity to try everything I could have that my wallet could afford to sort of understand and appreciate the intricacies of the food that was that they were giving me, because for me that's something that's been very important to me, and I suggested it to a few of the people that I met down there. They kind of followed suit, find ways to you know like see if there are places within where you live that can provide you with a positive experience towards your culture without having to only be, you know, given the experience through your parents. So that's why that's what I think, right? That you end up not wanting to connect with your culture or not wanting to be more culturally inept because you a don't want to, and b you're not given the right tools to to find ways to reconnect your own terms. That's what I'm trying to say. um, yeah, and then what else? I found that it was very very interesting how people kind of like how do I phrase this? Give me 1 second. Let me try to think. Um, I had a big conversation with you know self expression. That was one thing that I found very, very eye opening when I was in Sydney. Change this back here really. Yeah. So one thing that I found very interesting was that um, a lot of POCs, especially boys, were wearing like they had tattoos, they had earrings, um, and had their ears pierced and stuff like that. There was a lot of self-expression that would be found unconventional in traditional, um, brown communities. And I found that think the reason for that is because there's such a massive community and a lot more people, you're able to see more. If there are more people, self expressing themselves in a specific way, it makes you feel more comfortable with wanting to express yourself in that way. And I think that's why there are more people, more brown people that are the way they are in Sydney than there are in Brisbane. Um, but that was something very interesting to me, um, to kind of see, you know, the way that brown kids were acting, and I realized that it's because they're able to have so many other people that are doing the same thing that they are. And the reason I brought this up is because I think for me, especially where I am, in here, um, is that things like having my ears pierced or having tattoos. Like I have a tattoo appointment on Wednesday. Very, very excited. Hey Angie. So I found that things like wearing like silver chokers and necklaces and chains and all that stuff, that used to be very taboo is the wrong word, but it used to be very judged upon. I remember a specific time when I told my parents that I was be wearing rings, and they asked if I was gay. So that's something that that's what I've grown up with. I found that because I had a lot of trouble. Um, I will. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. I'll work on that next time. Like, yeah, I should. Yeah. Fix up the title now. I don't know why it's still like that. Delayed actually. Yeah, I'll work on the title before I. Oh yeah, yeah. I'll work on the title before I actually finish the record. Um, but what was I saying? Yes. So like, because I was able to see all these people down in Sydney that were, dressing the way I was or wearing the same type of jewelry and talking and behaving the same way, I felt a lot more easy with who I was there and a lot more comfortable. Um, and I find that because that type of environment exists down there, a lot of people are able to kind of push boundaries and express themselves a little bit more because they're already a precedent of positive acceptance in that environment, right? Um, at least for my life here, it's really hard to do that because you have people that are always kind of looking down on you and kind of trying to nitpick everything that you do and try to justify why what you're doing is wrong. Whereas down there, I think we have a solid society already that kind of advocates for expressionism stuff. It's very cool, and that's something that I did notice, especially when I went down to the cricket game where you have brown people from all ages, and all from everywhere, and being able to see all the people that look so different yet got along as if there was no difference at all was something that's very interesting to me to see. And so that's one of those other things that I did want to talk about. Because self-expression within the brown community can be very taboo in a lot of senses. I think for men specifically, for women, I think because a lot of physical expression falls under the gauge of you know, I think it's a lot more accepted, which is great. But that's my opinion. I have no idea, and I would love for people to come on and correct me and let me know if I have got that wrong. But things like dyeing your hair or having your ears pierced or your seconds or whatever, nose pierced and all that stuff. That's a lot more accepted for women than it would be for men. Um, and so that's one of those things that I noticed when I was down there. A lot more of it was done, and it's done, very very well. And people were actually promoting it as opposed to kind of judging from behind. A lot more people promoted it, and a lot more people got in touch with that aesthetic, participated in it, and that was really great to see. Um, what else? What else? I did have a separate. I was going to do a separate, episode entirely on dating, and I was going to bring a few people on there. So I will leave that topic for now because it's not something that I think needs to be talked about at least for a bit. I do want to get a few guests on podcast so I can have a back and forth. Um, but what else? I did find that when I did ask people how they felt about the way that they were dressed and forms of self expression they were engaging in, a lot of people are very, very individualistic in the answers. Obviously, the good answer. What I mean is they were very focused on know saying that this is my life and the way I live it is up to me. And if you like it, stay. If you don't like it, leave. And there was no focus on you know well I'm afraid of people judging me or what my parents might say this blah blah that there wasn't too much of a focus on that, which was good to see as well. And so when I was down there, it made me a lot more comfortable with getting my ears pierced because I didn't have to justify it to anybody. Because a lot of people, when I got them done, instantaneously congratulated me or complimented me, and then just went about their day. And it was very good to sort of, kind of, kind of have that decision be justified. Um, that's just how it is with my culture, and I don't know really how it is with other people. Um, because everything is very different. I think with other cultures, I think most cultures have an overarching, you know, band of agreement, but intricate details can be changed around. Um, what else about the trip? The trip in general was pretty good. To be honest, it was nice to do it by myself. Um, didn't necessarily have any issues with any people down there. I did go to a few. There's a Koreatown in Paramount, which was very good to see. It is just essentially, like it's a city block of sorts where it's lined with Korean restaurants and you know laundromats, and it is very much it has a very Korean aesthetic, and the neighborhood buildings are all in, with Korean signs and stuff like that. Really cool to see. And then in the city, there's a Chinatown which has Chinese architectural buildings and you know, Chinese street markets and stalls and you grocery shops and stuff like that. So I was exposed to a lot of that type of East Asian cultures down in Sydney because of the high population. That was really great. Um, I did also find myself being exposed to the Middle Eastern cultures, especially the Lebanese cultures, which was also really, really good because it is something that I haven't been exposed to a lot growing up. I think Chinese and Korean culture, because a lot of my friends have been Asian, have kind of delved heavily into that aspect. Whereas a lot of Middle Eastern cultures, because I used to live in Kuwait, I was very much an active participant in that culture, but I haven't been as much as I should have maybe when I came to Australia. So that was really nice for me to go to and you know see. I tried like very traditional meals and you know dabble in that, which is something that I think was really fun for me. Um, what else? I'm up to an hour already. Um, I've also been very how to explain it. I have had conversations with people around parenting. Now, in the sense of, I think a lot of people tend to be very harsh on their parents, and you know the concept of tiger moms and very strict Asian parents has been a running stereotype for however long. Um, and I'm not sure about anybody else, but I remember I used to get smacked quite a lot as a child, and that physical violence in my upbringing has been like sort of a not a it had an integral part of my growth. And I talked to a lot of people around how they saw that when they were younger and how they see it now, and how that aspect of physical violence and verbal violence has affected the way they view and their relationships with their parents now. Um, because I think the older I get, the more I tend to appreciate this idea that um, you know you can you can hate it at the time, but the older you get, the more you understand that most parents, especially first generation immigrants, have come in from a place of very poor living conditions, right? Or like great struggle. So ultimately, parents see you as an extension of themselves, and they see you almost as not a scapegoat, but um, a second chance, right? I think that's something that my parents have explained to me a lot. That they see me and my sibling as their redemption at a better life. It's almost as a, if I myself, like if my parents were born here, or if they were second gen immigrants, they would reach this far, and their goal is to get me that far or further, justify their belief that they would have made it themselves had they been given my opportunity, right? And so that's one thing that I have been talking to a lot of people with, and trying to you know like explain that maybe I think the older you get, the more you, at least from my view, the more you are able to understand they were doing this a lot of time out of desperation, out of this desire to well and truly ensure that we don't suffer the same way they did, right? Um, but that's obviously just me. And some parents maybe take too far, or other kids don't see it the same way. So I would love to, if anybody could sort of agree or disagree with me um, about whether or not we should be more accepting of the way that our parents have raised us, in the sense of strictness. Um, you know, I'm not sure about anybody else, but I remember it was always the you can't have fun 2 days in a row, in a 2 days in a row rule. If you've gone one day, you can't go out the next day because you gotta wait. You know, so I just, for me, as I've gotten older, I've understood that the reason that I to have a lot more discipline in my life is because I've been firsthand reprimanded for being too irresponsible, being too careless, and now I tend to be a little bit more cautious and think a little bit more. But I know people who have grown up just like me tend to have very broken relationships with their parents because they've seen it as an overstepping of their responsibilities, or like a overreach. This helicopter parent aesthetic is not for everyone. Um, but yeah, that's one of the other things that I tried to kind of talk about. Where I'm still going to do a separate episode on it, where I decipher how people feel about whether or not really we should be thanking our parents, or if we should even, you know, even be carrying on this type of behavior. So, would you treat your children the same way that you were treated as a child, in the sense of, you know, physical parenting? And I think some this is a very, very POC related issue, because from what I know, a lot of Caucasian, or white parents are very against, physical reprimandation. I don't think that's a word, but you know what I mean. White parents do the go sit in the corner for a minute. They do stern talking to, and that's about it. You know what I mean? The very I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed talk, that type of shit. Um, whereas like POC parents, they have the slipper, the belt, the broom, and the hands. You know, so that's going to be a separate topic in itself, where I have a few people on and kind of decipher a few questions related to that. But I found that in Sydney, a lot of people, they were able to understand upon conversation and appreciate the fact that their parents did this for specific motives. Um, and some were able to sort of admit that maybe they would not have reached the goals, or like the state that they are in, had they not lived in a state of fear, disappointment, right? Because obviously a disappointment leads to physical reprimandation. I'm gonna keep using that word. So you end up kind of, you know, over overextending yourself, but you work harder than you need to, or as hard as you can, because you don't want to be physically reprimanded. So that's another thing that I have talked about with people down in Sydney. And yeah, so there's a lot of stuff that I have talked about. This today's episode is going to be pretty short, to be honest with you, because I'm going to stretch out these topics into separate podcasts, but I'm going to be bringing in people to talk with, because um, my mouth is running dry. So I will list out the topics that I'm going to be talking about, and I'll if anybody is interested in the topics that I'm going to be talking about, please let me know. Please DM me, and I will have you on the podcast. So the first topic I'm going to be talking about is going to be. Let me just check. I have my whole list down here. So first topic will be the concept of understanding mental health. That's something that is very taboo in a lot of POC culture, not just brown culture, but all POC culture. So that's going to be something that needs to be addressed and talked about. Um, and especially, I think it might be a bit too late in the sense of COVID times, but I think people still need to realize that it needs to be talked about more. So that's going to be the first issue, mental health. Second issue is this issue that I'm talking about now, where where you're more giving to your parents and understanding their fears and desires when raising children. So a little bit more is going to be talked about, as instead of as opposed to just being hit and all that stuff. Like, I'll be talking about the 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 what am I trying to fucking say? I'm going to be talking about things such as getting married really early and being forced to have children, and how that affects the way you bring up your children. Like because a lot of marriages aren't done out of will, and a lot of children aren't raised out of will. So you end up with parents that are almost resentful of their children, because they see children as a burden that they didn't want to have, and that leads to sometimes extremely broken parenting. So that's also going to be something that I talk about in this whole topic. The second one. Third one, it'll be the dispelling of negative thoughts around self-expression. So the tattoos, piercings, all that stuff. The episode will be done sometime probably next week, after Wednesday, after I get my tattoos, so it has a bit more relevance to what I'm saying, and I can show everybody my tattoos, so that will be a good thing. Um, yeah, that one, we'll see how that goes, because I definitely will be getting somebody in who has a similar viewpoint on it, but I wouldn't mind anybody coming on and letting me know how they feel about the way that we see, the way that we treat people who aren't dressed within the social norms of POC culture, right? And then we'll obviously talk about dating as POCs, and focus on things like racial preferences, and fetishizing. I think is a very intricate difference that people need to know, and I think POCs dating with white people is a very sensitive topic, and so we'll talk about that, and we'll talk about you know erasure of culture in some cases, and the promotion of culture in other cases, and how to spot whether or not someone is fetishizing you for who you are, and the red flags, and how to get away from that, and all that stuff like that. What else? I'm going to be talking more about um, like the the idea of relating to each other, and I mean specifically with being brown. I think a lot of brown people do relate to a lot of things, but there are still parts of our culture that are very specific to where you're from. So if you're from North India, South India, or Pakistan, or whatever, um, I would love to have more brown POCs from countries that aren't Sri Lanka, because I always think that the intricacies are important to know. They aren't necessarily a big thing to highlight, but it's more just that being able to know how you're different from another person helps you appreciate the difference even more, I think. Um, so there's that, and what else? Um, we'll be talking about relationships and stuff like that too. I will at some point do a little sort of podcast on like not mental health, but just like the way education is viewed. I think that's one of the others that I completely forgot to slip my mind. Um, the way education plays such a positive but also negative aspect role within brown culture, how it affects the way that we behave with each other and with parents and all that stuff. That's going to be talked about. And the whole misrepresentation and underrepresentation in media. I know I visited that topic in my previous episode, but I'm going to visit that topic again. I will say a lot of the topics that I've discussed already, I'm going to be going over again with people, um, because I think that's something that needs to be done, because the more opinions I get, the better this podcast gets. Um, so we'll be talking about specific tropes. And one thing I didn't do when I talked about the misrepresentation of brown people in media was I didn't speak about the specific tropes that brown people are peddled into. You've got the shy, awkward man, the extremely attractive for POC, the token POC character that falls for the white guy, like, or the white person. Sorry, I should say white person because it has them with both genders. Those type of specific tropes that are portrayed in Western media, alongside the fact that Hollywood and South Asian media, the reasoning for why that aspect of media needs to be shared more. All the things that I will be talking about with people. I'm going to be focusing on getting more more participants to this podcast. So after this episode, I will be advertising the podcast on my Instagram, on my Facebook, and YouTube. So I will make more episodes with more people, because I think that's something that is the next step. I've done 3 episodes by myself, and my mouth is running dry. So I need more people to talk with me. So I'm going to be making time and kind of taking this podcast next step. And if you guys have any, topics that you want to talk about, or anything that you want to come on and talk to me about, please just let me know. Just DM me, and I'm happy to make time. Um, as the new semester is starting on Monday, so I will be a little bit more busy, but I aim to do at least one podcast a week for about 2 hours, and see how things go. But I think for now, that's about it in terms of what the podcast is today. So, like I said, it was only going to be a short one, just to talk about my trip to Sydney and what I've seen. And I didn't say everything. I didn't talk about everything that I saw in Sydney because I do want to kind of um, go over that more with the specific topics that I talk about. But this was just a generalization, and I do also need to get consent from a lot of the people that I met that I can talk about the stories and stuff like that. Um, but yes, so thank you everyone for listening. This was just a small recap on my trip to Sydney and topics that I sort of discussed while I was down there. Um, but yeah, over the next few weeks, I'll be very specifically targeting issues within brown culture. And I'll be bringing in POCs, not just brown POCs, but other POCs. And we'll talk about a lot of things, and slowly more topics will open up. And yeah, hopefully everything should work out. Thank you so much for listening. I'm just gonna go edit the title for this video and all that, and upload it onto YouTube. And I will be publicizing the podcast tomorrow. So thank you everyone for listening. I hope you have a lovely night.